Ladies and gentlemen, the Newton Nomadic Theater presents Story Slam.
So I'd like to start off. Tonight I'm just in the mood. I'm going to start off with the story myself. And it's about a little known but amazing, historical figure, Wallace Berry. Now, a lot of historical figures are known for, they do one major accomplishment, and then they rest on their laurels and bask in the glow of their great achievement, but not Wallace Berry. He had a whole lifetime of major achievements. He was probably most well known as the man who brought, single-handedly, he was responsible for bringing Smurfs to America. You know those little creepy little guys? And, it turned it into a whole empire. But 10 years before that, Wallace Berry, by the way, one of the things I like about this is, we get to set the rules, but because it's our event, I get to break all the rules. So I'm going to do a couple of things. One is, you're not supposed to have props, but I have props. And you're supposed to be 5 minutes. I'm pretty much sure I'm going longer than that. But so anyway, Wallace Berry, 10 years before this, created a series of statues, little figurines. And these sort of little plastic capsules of optimism and, and joy. And the most famous of these was a little man with a big grin and outstretched arms. And it says underneath, "I love you this much." And then, there's a whole series, hundreds of these. Anyway, I have a friend, a good friend. His name's Scott Wilson. I've known him for 35 years. And for most of those 35 years, we get together pretty regularly and we hatch ridiculous plans. Now, most of these plans never come to fruition. They're just to entertain ourselves. But occasionally, one of these plans escapes into the real world. Most famously, the Museum of Bad Art. But I'm not here to tell you about that tonight. But about 8 years ago, Scott came over to the house one night. And what he does is he's an antique dealer and he deals in collectibles. And he's a walking encyclopedia of things people collect and what they're worth. So he had come over, he'd tell me about his latest find, some obscure collectible that he was going to, make a killing on. And I said to him, "Is there anything that people don't collect?" And he said, "Well, it's funny you should ask that because about a month ago, I realized I've been seeing these little statues at yard sales for 20 years, and I've never seen one sell for more than $1. There's millions of them out there. Nobody collects them. So I've been buying them up." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do with them?" And he said, "I don't know." So we spent the rest of that night hatching, plans. And we had all kinds of ideas. And by the end of the night, we didn't really have a plan, but we had an agreement. We were going to do something. It was going to be multifaceted. And we had a name for the whole thing. And that's important. You got to have a good name. And it was called the Summer of Love. So the next day, I went on the internet and I got these stickers printed. Little Summer of Love, decals. And a couple nights later, we rounded up our usual suspects, these friends who are always game for ridiculous ideas. And we start kicking around ideas for the Summer of Love. And we had all sorts of ideas. A lot of them involved music. There's so many love songs that could be easily turned into love songs. But then we came up with the idea. We said, we have to launch this whole thing. So we decided we were going to make these bumper stickers that were exact same colors as stop signs. And they were going to say, "In the name of love." So we got these printed a few days later and started handing them out to our friends. And they started appearing on stop signs all over Greater Boston. But now one of the guys who was in on this is this friend of ours, Ollie Hallowell. Ollie, we've known for years. He's hysterically funny. He's a piece of work. He is a character. But he has he has the wonderful personality trait that he'll take any idea and he'll take it way, way, way too far. And we love him. I mean, we love him for that. So Ollie, after he gets the bumper stickers, he gets inspired. And he decides he's going to make a stencil. Now, I don't want to offend anybody, but if you are offended, take it up with Ollie, not me. Ollie makes this stencil, and it's a crucifix. It's Jesus on the cross, It says, "I love you this much." And he starts spray painting these all over Cambridge on the sidewalks. But Ollie's just getting going now. He's hitting his stride. So now he hooks up with this video friend, the guy who does video, and they spend an afternoon making this ad. Now, about 20 years ago, there used to be these ads on late night TV for K-Tel records. All the hits of the 80s, 50 best funk songs of all time. They all had the same format. It was this rolling list of song titles, some snippets, and a voiceover. Hey, so they make this ad modeled on one of those K-Tel things for Love Karaoke, coming to a karaoke bar near you. And they got this, this whole elaborate ad. And then Ollie starts scouting karaoke bars, and he finds this great dive bar down in East Cambridge, down by the courthouse, that is a karaoke mecca. On Friday and Saturday nights, they have this huge crowd for karaoke. He goes in with this ad and tries to convince the manager that Love Karaoke is going to be the next big thing in karaoke. Well, the manager's like, not, he's a little dubious, but he says, look, get, next, if you can get your crowd down here on Friday night, we'll reserve 10 tables for you. We'll give this thing a try. So on Friday night, we round up everybody. We get like 30, 35 people go to this karaoke bar. Scott shows up with bags full of these, and we decorate the whole bar with these little statues. And I've got a bunch of cigarette lighters I hand out to all of our friends. The music starts. They pull, we decide Ollie's going to be just put Ollie's name in. So they pull a name, and then the third name is Ollie. So Ollie gets up there. You have to know the guy to truly appreciate this. He gets up and strides the stage. 35 people are cheering wildly. Everybody's like, what the hell's going on? And he lets loose with the Beatles. All you need is love. And you all know the song starts out, love, love, love. Immediately, 35 people with cigarette lighters, love, love, love. And Ollie is out of control. The rest of the karaoke crowd is like, what the hell is going on here? So once Ollie went, 35 of us all put our name in. And over the next 2.5 hours, we did this sort of survey course of late 20th century pop love songs. We covered a lot of ground. The Supremes. Stop in the name of love. Paul Simon. There must be 50 ways to leave your lover. I can't remember. Love Shack. B-52s. Love Stinks. My personal contribution, Roxy Music. Oh, can't you see? Love is the drug. It went on and on and on and on. By the time Ollie got up for his second number, which was a heart-rending, emotional version of I don't know how to love him, the whole rest of the karaoke crowd threw their hat in, and everybody started singing love songs the whole rest of the night. It was the most bizarre, hysterically funny, ridiculous, and absurd night I have ever spent. And I think if Wallace Berry were dead, which he's not, he would have been smiling down on us. We spent, we shared a lot, we spread a lot of joy and a lot of love that night. And when I'm looking out at you, I can see in some of your eyes going, that was odd. But it's not nearly as odd as what we'll probably end up doing with Scott's collection of Smurfs. So there you go.
You've lost that love and feeling, now it's gone.
Have you lost that love and feeling? Could you use a little more love in your heart? Then it's time for you to love-ify your life.
Can you feel the warmth tonight?
Yes, come on down to your local WOV karaoke and sing your heart out to your favorite songs. Only this time, sing it with WOV.
Wub Shack, baby Wub Shack. Wub Shack, baby Wub Shack. Stop in the name of Wub.
Sometimes it makes you high. Sometimes it stinks.
Wub stinks.
Wub stinks. Yeah, yeah.
But it's always better when you sing it with WOV.
I don't know how to wub him.
It doesn't matter who you love or how well. Let your spirit soar with the power of WOV. WOV Karaoke. Coming soon to a karaoke bar near you.
Get this away. In the late 1980s, I did graduate research in southern Africa. I could see better then, and I traveled to several countries. And my favorite country by far to travel to was Zambia. And that was my favorite because the people were very nice, very warm, and I always came home with an interesting story to tell. So my most interesting story is what I call my Zambia elevator story. And so here goes. The main street in Lusaka, which is the capital, is Cairo Road. And at the end of Cairo Road is the Zimco building, which at least at the time was the tallest building in Lusaka, and I'm assuming the tallest building also in Zambia. It's maybe about 25 stories tall. So one day I had a meeting that I needed to go to in the Zimco building. So I walked into the lobby, and the first thing I noticed was that there were 3 elevator doors, and before the left door and the right door, there was nobody. And in front of the center door, there was a long line of people. So I got to the end of the line and I asked somebody what was going on. And they said, oh, well, the other 2 elevators, sir, they're broken, sir, but you just queue up here, sir, and you will be good to go. You will meet your meeting all on time and everything. So I thought it was good that I got there early, maybe about 20 minutes early, because it took about 15 minutes for me to finally get into the elevator. So got wedged into the elevator, smushed in there like a sardine. The door closed, and it started going up. Immediately, people started shouting out numbers. 3, 6, 14, 18. Somebody nudged me. Excuse me, sir, what floor are you going to, sir? I said, 8. And about half the people yelled, 8, 8. And sure enough, on the 3rd floor, it stopped. The door opened. People went out. 6th floor, stopped. People went out. Then we got up to the 8th floor. It said, this is your floor, sir. Have a good day. Have a nice day. And I went out, and the door closed, and something didn't quite seem right about that. But anyway, I had my meeting. I went, and I didn't have time to think too much about it. Went to my meeting, and if I remember, it was a very nice meeting. Meeting ended up, finished, and I went back to the elevator, and I pressed the button, the down button, and I waited, and I waited. Nothing happened. After a couple of minutes, I pressed the down button again, and for good measure, I pressed the up button too. And I waited, and I swore I heard the elevator swooshing by, going up, going down, at least 2 or 3 times, just swooshing right by me. And I waited another 3-4 minutes, and I thought, well, something tells me this is not going to work. And I found the stairwell, and I walked down the 8 flights of stairs, out the door, and left, and did the rest of my day's business. Later that day, or maybe the next day, I can't remember exactly, a friend of mine, another American friend, who happened to be living in Zambia, said, "Oh, tonight I'm invited over to this British expatriates place. He's been in this country for 30 years. He knows everything. I mean, he really knows where all the skeletons are buried in this place. And you'd have a really good time. The food is good. He's got a lot of Johnny Walker, and you would have a great time there." So I said, sure. I didn't have a whole lot on my social calendar in Zambia that day. And so we go to the house. And sure enough, this fellow, he's very, very entertaining. He's telling all these stories of strange things that happen in Zambia. At the time, Zambia was sort of at the tail end of sort of a failed experiment in socialism. So, funny things happen in economies like that. So he had all these stories. And then there was a lull in the conversation. And I said, excuse me, something strange happened to me yesterday, and I can't really figure out what it was. And so I told him the story that I just told you, just all the numbers being shouted out and me not being able to get down the elevator. And he says to me, "Are you telling me that nobody informed you about the little man?" I said, What little man?" "Well, the little man in the elevator." I said, "Well, what little man in the elevator?" "Oh, everybody in Lusaka knows this story. There's a little man The elevators there have not worked in quite some time, but the Zambians always have very unique ways of figuring these things out. So there's a little man, he sits on the top of the elevator, and he runs a pulley all day. And the people in the elevator, they shout out the number, and he stops his pulley, and somehow he has a way of opening the door and closing the door, and he goes up and down like this all day long. And I said, wow, that is truly amazing. But there's something I still don't understand about it, okay? I can understand how if you're in the elevator and you want to get out, you can yell and he'll stop the door. But what if you're on the outside trying to get in? I says, oh, elementary, my boy, that's very simple. What you do, you approach the elevator, you place your ear right next to the crack in the elevator, and you listen very hard for the elevator when it's whooshing up or whooshing down. Okay? When you hear the elevator approaching, you put your mouth in front of the crack in that elevator door and you yell as loud as you can your floor number 888. And the little man, if you yell loud enough, and if your timing is just right, and if the elevator is not quite full, the little man will stop for you every time. And that's my Zambia elevator story. Thank you.
Well, I had no intention of telling a story tonight, except I actually had an odd thing happen to me today. So I'm standing, getting ready to get into my car, and my husband suggests that he's going to take me out to lunch. And we live in Wellesley, and we're going past Roche Brothers, and then we go on past Whole Foods, debating where we're going to go, and we come to a stoplight. And we discover this guy in a Porsche Cayenne. And first of all, I hope none of you are this person. And absent-mindedly, he crumples up something, and it looks like his lunch. He rolls down the passenger window, he's the driver, and he chucks his lunch out of the Porsche window onto essentially the pocket park in front of Whole Foods, if you've ever been there. And my husband, who's a very mild-mannered, sweet guy, gets incensed. And he cannot believe that this guy has such a sense of entitlement as to throw half his lunch out into this lovely pocket park. And it's a very odd response from my husband. And so I get all churned up. It may be the election, I don't know what it is, but I get completely crazed. I open the door of the car. I leap to the pocket park. I grab the garbage, and I get back in the car, and I say, I got his garbage. And I said, I'm doing it. I'm shaking it at the guy and freaking out in the back of the car, hoping that he's going to see me. But of course, he has now, since he's finished his lunch, pulled out his phone, and he is now proceeding to text while driving off, at which point my husband's really, really flipping out. So we say, are we going to go to lunch now? And he goes, absolutely not. We're going to follow him. And so there's you got a picture, our minivan, 2006, dense, lots of stickers from all the kids' activities, and there's my husband just totally like this behind the wheel, and like a Maserati driver. And he's weaving through traffic, following this guy, and he goes, I bet he's going to the grocery store. And so at this point, we've been cut off by a few trucks, and I want to say we have 8, 9 cars in front of us, and so we don't really know where this guy has gone. And I proposed the idea that maybe we could, if he isn't going there, he's going home, we can follow him home, figure out his address, and I'll mail him back his garbage, which I'm really excited about. And Nick goes, I bet he's going to Roche Brothers. And so he stealthily sneaks into the parking lot, and I still got the garbage in my hand, and we see him park his car, and he gets up, and he gets out, and he goes into Roche Brothers, and I take his garbage, and I write a note that says, check your privilege, don't litter, and I stick the bag under his windshield wiper, and I leave it there, and I am the most excited, happy human being I have been in about 3 weeks. That is my story.
My husband and I were in the kitchen making breakfast. He leaned over to give me a big kiss, and the toast popped up. That was odd. Oh. And she said they were able to put the eyeball back in. That was odd.
The election a while ago, they reminded me of this what happened back in 1984. It was August. It was on a Wednesday morning, about 10 in the morning. A guy by the name of Jimmy McGonigal was driving down the Mass Pike from Boston to his parents in Springfield. He was past Worcester, past Route 84, going about 80 miles an hour. And he looks in the rearview mirror, and he sees a state trooper car with the lights on, signaling him to pull over. And he immediately came up with a plan, which was that he could outrun the state troopers. It was 2 miles to an exit. He'd get off the exit and lose them in the back roads. I'm not saying it was a good plan, but that was his plan. The reason he had the plan is he was on probation. He hadn't been good about seeing his probation officer. There was a probation warrant out for him. If he got stopped for speeding, he was probably going to do 6 months in jail. So he stepped on the gas. He took off down the Mass Pike. He got up to about 110 miles an hour. Cops right behind him. And he realizes he's made a mistake. He's already gone past that exit. And he sees a sign that says, next exit, 17 miles. So he does the only thing he can do. He steps on the gas and goes even faster. So he's going about 120 miles an hour down the Mass Pike. The pike takes a gradual turn like this. He loses control of his car, and it kind of just slowly goes off the side, down the edge of the road, bangs into some trees. And he's shaken up. He opens the door. He gets out. He's okay. And he forms another plan, which is he's going to run away. And he has no idea where he is, and he just runs into the woods. Now, the state troopers behind him, 2 cops, a young guy and an old guy. So they pull up seconds later. The young guy jumps out of the car and takes off after him, chasing him through the woods. And Jimmy's kind of trying to dodge his way to lose the cop, and the cop's keeping up with him. And he sees an opening in the woods that he's coming up to, and he figures he's younger than this guy. He can lose him. So his plan is when he hits that opening, he's going to really put on a burst of speed and try to lose the cop. He gets the opening, he puts on the burst of speed, he hits a hole in the ground, and he falls. And in 2 seconds, the cop's on his back, has his knee in his back, takes his 2 hands, puts the cuffs on him behind his back, pulls him up. The other older cop catches up with them. And at that point, they realize there's something odd. They look around, and they're in a well-groomed and well-tended field of marijuana. And after a short period of time, they hear the person who ends up being my client, Tom Bresnahan, say, "Hey, you assholes, get out of my field." The state troopers pull out their guns, and they say, "Put your hands up, you're under arrest." State troopers, Tom holds his hands up like that. They're in a state park about a mile from anywhere. Tom lives on the edge of the state park and has been tending this field of marijuana for 8 or 9 years, selling ounces to his friends out there in western Massachusetts, not bothering anybody. And this asshole has to lead the cops directly to his... So they arrest him. He knows somebody who knows me. I go. I get him bailed out. And one problem is he's got some serious criminal charges, cultivation, distribution of marijuana. And the other is he works for the post office. He's been there for 19 years. And the rule in the post office is if you get convicted of a drug offense during the time you're employed, you lose your pension. So he calls me up a couple of days later, and he says, "My supervisor wants to meet with you to talk about the pension problem." So I said, "All right, I can go out, meet him at the post office." And he says, "No, he wants to meet you in a bar." So I said, "Okay." So I go and I meet the guy. He's a nice guy, and he says, if Tom retires now, he can lock his pension in at that number. And if the post office doesn't find out about this arrest, he should be okay. And he said, "I'm his supervisor. I'm not going to tell him." And he says, "And I want you to know that's not connected to the fact that I've been buying pot from him for 8 years." Absolutely. So that's fine. So now I got to deal with the court case. And I find out that the advantage I have in the court case is everybody thinks this is the funniest story they ever heard. So I go to talk to the DA. He's laughing about it. We go into chambers with the judge. The judge is in hysterics, thinks it's the funniest story he's ever heard. And because everybody feels so good about it, I can get him a good deal. I get him probation. He moves out of the state, moves to California. I stayed in touch with him. He's been farming. Doesn't tell me what I don't want to know. So about 6 months later, I'm in court, and a guy that I know says to me, "Did you represent Tom Bresnahan?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I represented Jimmy McGonigal, the kid who..." And he says, I said, yeah, my guy thought it was the most unlucky thing that ever happened that he met your guy. And he said, well, it's funny because Jimmy thought he was lucky because of your client. He said, when they got Jimmy down in the field and they put the cuffs on him, that's when he remembered he had an ounce of pot in his back pocket. And when your guy showed up and they went over to arrest him, Jimmy reached in, pulled out the pot, shook it on the ground, threw the baggie over there, and he said, what better place to hide an ounce of marijuana? So that's why the election, not the presidential election, the ballot initiatives made me think of that story. So.
My friend EJ grew up in Massachusetts. She went to Boston University where she met my husband in her first year, and when I came along in the scene in his senior year, I met his friends, and EJ and I were extremely close. Sometime after graduation, EJ moved out to California to seek her fame and fortune. But she always came back to visit her family in Massachusetts, and she always came to see us every one of those trips. So when we had children, she never married, but when we had children, she was like an aunt to our children, very, very close. Well, in her 50th year, she came to visit, and I remember thinking that whole time that she was with us that I wanted to take her picture. Remember cameras? I couldn't find my camera. I didn't have it on a cell phone, and I couldn't find my camera, and I remember just feeling like, oh, I really want to capture EJ with the kids. That was around Memorial Day. Later that summer, in August, we got a phone call on yet another blast from the past, our answering machine. Remember answering machines? It was a Sunday night. We had just come back from out of town. I checked the answering machine, and the message was, if this is Steffi and Eric, EJ's friend, please call me. This is her sister. And the voice did not sound happy. I was thinking, please tell me you're going to have a 50th birthday party for her, please. But I called, and EJ had pancreatic cancer. So this was the end of August. The Jewish high holidays were coming up, and I knew I couldn't just get on the next plane because I had a family to take care of. But I got in touch with her. I was able to talk to her a couple of days later, and I told her that I would be there as soon as the holidays were over. Unfortunately, EJ died on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and that was just heartbreaking. Then my thought was, their family is not Jewish. They will have to bring the body back from California. I hope they don't have the funeral on Yom Kippur, because that's another obligation of our family. They chose to have the wake it turned out on that day, on Yom Kippur. So in the morning, we all went to the synagogue. But the night before, just before, Yom Kippur is the holiday where Jews fast from sundown to sundown. So just before we were sitting down to our meal, that would be the last meal before we fasted, the phone rang, and it was another one of EJ's sisters. She had a lot of sisters, saying, the wake is tomorrow afternoon, and Mom wants your family to be comfortable there, and so the casket will be closed. Well, I said, this is your mother's tradition. Whatever your mother wants is right, and we will do whatever she wants. 2 minutes later, the phone rings. Mom wants the casket to be open. I said, of course, whatever your mother wants. And 2 minutes later again. And finally, I had to say, we are going to services. We will be there tomorrow, whatever it is. So the next morning we went to services. That afternoon we drove to Lexington and we went to the funeral home. And the sisters saw us come in and they all came running over and they said, it's an open casket. So the kids went into the car and we went through the line. And I didn't actually look at her, but I did go over to give her mom a big hug. And as I reached for her mom, I heard EJ's laughter, which I assumed was a relative, a sister, a cousin. I said, I hear EJ's laughter. And her mom said, Oh, we all wish we could. But it was a very distinct laugh that my friend EJ had. So that was the wake. We said goodbye. The next morning, the children were off to school. My husband and I went to the funeral. And just before walking into the church, a sister came over to me and said, Mom wants everyone to be able to sing the final hymn, so we've chosen Amazing Grace. I said, thank you so much for letting us know. We went into the church, we sat towards the back, and it was a church that we had seen for other family members of her family. And the funeral started. The minister got up, and then I looked up, and I saw EJ. She was sitting up 6 feet over the casket. And it was amazing. As each member of the family spoke, she was laughing, and she was laughing hard, and she was laughing loud. She was laughing so loudly that at one point I wanted to say, shh, I'm trying to hear your funeral. But of course, I was afraid that might be the last time. Finally, she was there the whole time, getting lighter and lighter. And as we started Amazing Grace, EJ looked at me and said, I have to rest now. She leaned back, she disappeared, and I never heard that laugh again.
That Was Odd story is about my initial dalliance in exceeding my expectations. I grew up on a sort of a rougher side of the tracks type childhood, and I met a girl, and she blew me away, and she was everything I could ever possibly have dreamed of, except she was from the other side of the tracks. And so I was determined to do everything I could to win her heart. So I went to we both went to a ski resort event at the Dartmouth Skiway, and this girl I was very interested in signed up for the slalom race, and she was like, oh sure, of course I can slalom. And I was like, I can't, I can barely ski, but if you can, so can I. So I said, you know what? I'll sign up for the slalom race as well. So, long story short, I find myself in love, and yet at the top of a black diamond slalom race. Like, wow, these are a lot steeper than they look on television in the Olympics. I begin my first and only slalom race. I get through 2 gates, and I'm like, dude, rocking it. And then it turns out you have to turn your skis. My skis decide to make an X, not a beautiful symmetry. My knee goes one way, my body goes the other way, not good. I find myself collapsed in a frozen pit on the side of the mountain. Along comes the ski rescue team, hooray, the Red Cross, all that kind of stuff. And they strap me in. So, I'm like, locking me into the ski sled, and they start to tie down my arms. And I'm like, whoa. I got like a little bit of claustrophobia. Can you like keep my arms free? And like, it's against regulation. I'm like, please. Like, okay. And my knee's starting to be like, hi, remember that weird thing you did about 10 minutes ago? I'm like, okay, maybe I should just. So they don't tie my arms down, and they're not happy. So we start going down. So we're going down the mountain. And I'm like, duh. And the trees are going this way, and I'm like, duh. And all of a sudden the trees are going this way. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Why are the trees going this way? And I turn, and I look up the Dartmouth Skiway, and there are the 2 rescue ski guys. They've collided and fallen down. They've let go of my sled. And I am hurtling down the Black Diamond Skiway at a very high speed. And I'm like, I'm going to die. In love, but death. And then suddenly God spoke to me and he said, "Your hands." And they were free. And I put them out and I began to slowly turn my sled. And eventually I pushed myself into the trees. And then other ski rescue people caught up with me. A half hour later, I'm in the Dartmouth Skiway office. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that was a little weird. You don't often expect that to happen. And then in comes a guy in a suit. And he goes, "Hello, Mr. Walsh." And I'm like, "Are you a lawyer?" And he's like, "I represent the Dartmouth College. I'd like to talk with you about what just happened." And I'm like, this is taking a turn for the better, actually, because I'm alive and some guy in a suit at the skiway is having to talk with me. Roll the clock forward. It's 3 hours later. And all of my friends are at a bar dancing, and in walks a guy in crutches. And there she is. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is the scary part after that really bizarre experience with the rescue team. What will she make of me? She walks up, she kisses me and says, "That was the stupidest, bravest, most romantic thing I have ever seen in my life." 27 years later,
this is a very short story. It'll make up for some of the stories I ran a little over. I owned a little apartment building in Boston, and one day one of the tenants called and said, "I've got beer coming through the light fixture." I figured she's a little delusional, but I've got to go down there and check it out. So I go down there, knock on the door, and a fellow there leads me in, the woman's there, and bring me over to the light fixture, and it's one of these pull chain ceiling fixtures, with the string. And I see at the bottom of the string this little drop of something. Beer. So I go upstairs and knock on the door. A fellow opens the door and I said, "We got a little problem downstairs, and from the bedroom in the back looks like beer coming through." So I said, "Well, let's go take a look." So we go in there, and there's a woman in the bed, passed out, with a big bottle of beer tipped over on the floor. Beer was coming through the floor through the light fixture.
So in January 1992, my grandmother died. She was about 81 years old, and she lived a long, full life. And I can't really say I was close to her, mostly because she lived in Portland, Oregon, and I grew up in Houston, Texas. So I was a junior at University of Texas at the time, studying mechanical engineering. And it's time to go get on the airplane to fly to Portland for the funeral. And my sister, actually, older sister, she's in her first year of law school at the University of Texas. So she and I are on the flight together. We go to the airport, and it's middle of the week, so I'm bringing my backpack full of books and homework to, stay caught up while I'm away. And going through security at the airport, and they ask, the bag goes through the x-ray, and they say, "Can we look in your bag?" And I said, "Sure." "Do you have anything long and pointy in here?" And I'm like, "Well, I have a mechanical pencil." So the guy unzips the bag, and he pulls it out, and my heart drops, and my eyes go wide, and I'm like, oh no. I should probably go back to the beginning of the story. When I started as a freshman, I joined a fraternity When you're at a school as large as the University of Texas, there's 50,000 people there. It's common that you kind of join smaller social groups to kind of find your way. And a lot of the friends that I grew up with from Texas were there, so I had a big group of people that I already knew, but I also met some new people. One of them I instantly bonded with. His name was Steve Ziegler, and he was from Pennsylvania. He had come to the University of Texas, but before he started, he had joined the Marines as a reserve soldier. And he and I really hit it off. I've long had an interest in the military, thought of serving myself. Even in the Marines, I actually tried to enlist in the Marines when I was 11 years old, but that's another story. He and I became really close friends, and he was also studying mechanical engineering, so we had a lot of classes together. After the first year, in the summer of 1990, this is when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And so we come back to school in September, and right away, Steve's unit is activated. So he has to, we're in school for only 2 weeks, and he has to leave to go for training. So late at night before he leaves, there's a knock on my room in the fraternity house, and I open the door, and Steve is there. And he has his arms full of stuff, and he says, I don't know anybody else that would appreciate this stuff, so I'm giving it all to you. And we're going through it, and it's things like, he had just come back from his 2 weeks of training that summer, so he had all this stuff that he brought with him. There was like military rations and empty shell casings and magnesium flare booby traps, and he said, you can keep all this stuff, but the only thing that I want back is this. And he pulls out a live round of ammunition, a 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary bullet. It's about this big. I risked getting thrown in the stockade for this. I definitely want it back. Okay, you're gonna have it back. So he's gone. If anyone remembers history, in like January of 1991 is when the U.S.-led coalition, invades, and there's a very brief war. Steve actually never made it to the war. He was training, and his unit was activating in Southern California. So it ended quickly. He, stayed on active duty through the rest of the year. But he did come back. But that following year, I was starting my junior year. He was now a full year behind me in school. We didn't see each other very often. We didn't have classes. He wasn't coming by the fraternity house very often. So on the off chance, every now and then we'd bump into each other at school in the mechanical engineering building. I'd always be like, oh, Steve, I don't have it to give to you. So at the beginning of the next semester, I'm like, well, I'm going to plan ahead here, and I'm going to put this bullet in my backpack so that when I see Steve at school, I'll say, I got it right here. So now you can tell where this is going. The security man pulls out the bullet, and I'm like, oh, my God. And of course, my sister knows nothing about it, and suddenly it's like, what is that? Why do you have that? What's going on? Because what was going on was every security person from the security checkpoint was suddenly right there. Austin police were coming in, and the guy is holding the bullet. He's looking at it like he doesn't know what to do. And the first thing going through my mind isn't, I'm going to get arrested. It isn't, I'm going to miss my flight. It is, they're going to take the bullet away. No one knows what to do. My sister's freaking out. I'm like, and the guy's holding it, and I'm like, I've had this friend, and he's got to get. I tell you what, I'll just take it and go put it in the car. And the guy let go of it. I think he didn't want to have to deal with it either. So now this is the time in Austin, Texas. The airport was still pretty small, so you could literally walk out the front of the terminal, and there was a parking lot right across the way. So I just run out and put the bullet in my glove compartment, and I come back. They let me get on the plane. I come back, and, after the funeral is a great, family time reminiscing. I come back home, and I pick up the phone as soon as I return, and I said, Steve, meet me Monday morning. I have something to give to you. So upon reflection in the way that our current airport security system is now, the fact that, I could have been basically a convicted felon at this point if it had been any other time. So the way I was able to just take the bullet and run was very odd.
And I'm in a mood tonight, so I'm going to tell another story. So I went to, my family and I went to a wedding, my nephew's wedding out in Chicago in this past month. And we were out there, and my daughter and I were walking down the street on a Saturday afternoon downtown Chicago. And I happened to look over, and we were going past this beautiful building, and there was a sign on it, and it said, Richard Driehaus Museum. And I kind of did a double take. And I said to my daughter, I've spent a weekend with, I know it's that Richard Driehaus. And she looked at me like, what? So here's the story. I worked about 20 years ago in a software company down in Kendall Square for a short time. And I became friends with this other engineer, this woman, Elizabeth Driehaus. She came from Chicago. She had a big family. And she used to talk about her rich brother, Richard. And Richard apparently, she said he, as a little kid, he was, he like from a really young age, he sort of had this knack for making money. And as he got older, he just kept making money. And that he had made insane, like crazy money. He ran some kind of, something to do with finance and this and that, and he was crazy wealthy. And the rest of the family was just sort of, regular folks, but they had the rich brother Richard. So the following summer, she called me up one day. She said, my rich brother Richard just bought a house in Nantucket for our family, and Demetrius and I were going down for the week. He just bought this place. Do you and Mari want to come down for the weekend? So we had never been to Nantucket. We said, great. So we took the boat, the ferry out, and we got an address, and we get to Nantucket town, some of the most expensive real estate in Massachusetts. And we're walking down the street, and we come to this address, and there's this, this can't be it. It's this huge guest house, it looks like, like a big guest house. We go, well, this is the address. So we go up, ring the doorbell, and Elizabeth comes to the door, and she goes, wait till you see this place. It's unbelievable. So we go in, and he had only bought this house 3 weeks before, and he closed on the house, and then he sent staff to Nantucket with instructions to furnish the house and in Nantucket antiques. You can imagine what that cost. He told a florist, he said, get a florist and put in a garden in bloom in the front. There was this spectacular garden that had been planted like 3 days before, but it was all looked like it had been there, forever. And she brings us to the house, and it is amazing. It's just a spectacular house, incredibly well equipped with anything you would want. It was there. So, we're living large here. We got quite the weekend house here. And so we hang out, we make dinner, we're hanging out after dinner, sitting around in the living room, and all of a sudden we hear this front door slam, and in walks this man. And it's rich brother Richard, unexpectedly, arrives. And we're kind of a little self-conscious, we're in the guys, and we get introduced, and he says, "Oh, I'm having a house party," and he's got this donkey laugh, this really loud donkey laugh, which is that was odd. So I mean, he was a nice enough guy, but he was odd. He just had some. You couldn't quite put your finger on what the deal was, but he was a little kind of off, but very pleasant. So that night we decided the next day, Nantucket's got bike paths all over the island. And there's 6 brand new bicycles in the basement, of course, because everything is in there. So we make plans. We're going to go ride bikes across the island to the South Beach and go to the beach there. So we get up in the morning, and Saturday morning, we're having our breakfast, and Richard comes down dressed in a business suit and a tie and dress shoes. And Elizabeth says, are you coming to the beach with us? And he says, yeah. And she says, Richie, you can't come in those clothes. You have to have sports clothes. And he says, I don't have any sports clothes. She said, go down the store, around the corner, there's a men's shop. Go down and ask him for sports clothes. And he goes, oh, okay. And he walks out the door. And I'm thinking, that was odd. So about 40 minutes later, he comes back with all these bundles. And he goes upstairs. He comes back a few minutes later. And he looks like an 11-year-old kid who put on a tuxedo for the first time, kind of grinning and proud of himself, and don't I look funny? And he's got sports clothes. And so Elizabeth's, oh, come here, Richard. And she's cutting off all the labels that are sticking out everywhere. And so we get on the bikes, and we drive across the island on the bikes. And it's a beautiful day. We get there. It's hot. We're all ready to dive in the water, and here we are at the beach. And we're locking up the bikes. And Richard says, I'm gonna go back to the house. I'll meet you back there. And I start to argue with him, and Elizabeth kind of takes me aside and says, let him go. And so he gets on his bike and, just turns around and rides home. And I say, Elizabeth, what's the deal? And she says, well, you have no idea how big a deal it is that he actually came, rode a bike to the beach. He just doesn't do stuff like this. And I'm like, well, what's up? And she says, I don't know. He's always been weird. He's always, like, when he was a little kid, he was an odd kid. And he had a tough time growing up. He was like, people were like, he was a strange kid. And she said, but a funny thing, she said, a funny thing happened. As he got more and more money, his eccentricities people just overlook. And now he's like, he functions quite well, and everybody just ignores these, kind of things. And she said, I don't know, as an adult, you hear all this stuff about autism and Asperger's. I kind of think, I'm no expert, but I think he may be on that, like, that scale, that spectrum. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, we spend the day at the beach. We come back to the house late in the afternoon, and Richard says, I'm taking you all out to dinner tonight. I said, oh, great. And Elizabeth said, where are we going? And he said, the most expensive restaurant on the island. And it was kind of funny. He didn't say the best restaurant on the island, the most expensive restaurant on the island. And apparently he had gone to the clothing store and said, what's the most expensive restaurant on the island? And they told him, and so he took us there. So we all got in a cab. We drove across the island to this unbelievable restaurant. And we go in, and they bring a wine list, and he takes the wine list, and he opens it up, and he says, 2 bottles of this. And he just points at the most expensive bottle on the wine list, which is like a couple $100 a bottle. And Elizabeth tells me afterwards, he's kind of figured out that, like, he kind of has a hard time dealing with people sometimes. And he's figured out that people seem to like expensive things. And he's got lots of money, so he just, when in doubt, just get the expensive thing because people seem to like that. And the funny thing is, he was right. We had a great weekend. We ate and we drank. It was just, it was wonderful. So the whole weekend was very odd, but very pleasant. And at the end of it, we went off, and I've never seen him since then. But since then, I have heard that he is now, like, very well-known philanthropist in Chicago, and Treehouse Financial something is like manages, $50 bazillion in this, and he's like this sort of pillar of Chicago money and finance and business. But he's a little odd. That's my story.
This story happened not that long ago. It was actually on Halloween, which would be odd anyway. I was going into Boston to take a couple of people on a food tour, and I was very excited to get into town and see if people were dressed up. I wanted to see if I could find the best costume. Figured, what should I wear? Well, I was a big Prince fan, and I figured I would put all my purple on. I borrowed my mother's, well, it is mine now, her raspberry beret. I have a purple guitar pin, all in purple. I put the beauty mark in the right place, and there I was. I went on the subway. Nobody knew who I was, but, I knew who I was. I figured somebody might, but anyway, I met the 2 women who I was taking on a tour, and they turned out to be from Minnesota, which made it even better, and I told them, I'm wearing my raspberry beret. Oh, very nice, okay. Anyway, we did the tour, and we went to various places, and I didn't see anybody really in any kind of a great costume during the day, Boston being rather conservative. One of the places that we went to, the last place where we had an apple cider donut, which is to die for, which was in the Boston Public Market. Anyone been in there near Quincy Market? Great idea, all regional foods, gourmet items. Then we went to the Union Oyster House to finish off with Indian pudding. About 4 o'clock, and I figured, okay, it's Halloween, what should I do next? I wanted to go towards Beacon Hill because I know it rivals Salem for having wonderful decorations. I hadn't done it before, and it was a beautiful day. It was just getting a little bit darker, and I walked around Beacon Hill and still wasn't seeing the best costumes, although everybody was out on their stoop with bowls of candy to give all the kids, which was very nice. And I walked up Chestnut Street, and music was coming out of one of the townhouses there. The Doors, People Are Strange, which was perfect. And then Donovan's Season of the Witch came on. So I'm really in a good mood, and I'm thinking, okay, where are the costumes? There was a brother and sister walking around. One was a what am I trying to say here? One was dressed as a washing machine, and one was dressed as a dryer. The washing machine it was great, all cardboard. The washing machine had some laundry detergent on the top of it, and then the dryer had some fabric softener. So those were like coming in, the top ones that I had seen that day. So then I was continuing through Beacon Hill, making my way down to Charles Street and then through the Public Garden. And I'm coming out at the entrance on Arlington Street, and I took a left turn. Public Garden is on my left, and I saw this little white thing scampering around. I thought, no, that couldn't be a rat. And I saw a couple right up ahead looking inside, and then I got a better view of it. It was a white squirrel, an albino squirrel, a ghost squirrel. The best costume of the day. You've seen that squirrel? Well, it was pretty odd, and I will say that if anybody wants to see it, it is in my cell phone. That was my Halloween.
Can we get Francie Sparks, please? And while she's coming, I've got one of these to read to you. Yesterday after lunch, I went grocery shopping at Roach Brothers. I went to get in my car, and there was a discarded lunch under my windshield wiper.
So I've never done anything like this before, so I'm a little bit nervous, and so I might have to refer to my notes. So this is the story of my mother's funeral, and I'm glad somebody else had a funeral story. So this is a funeral where, I don't know if you've ever had this, like the last story, where the person seems to be present. So the situation was that my parents, and it was 1980, my parents sold the Brookline house, and they moved to Florida into a condo, and they were very happy there. And they were there for about a year, just a year, and it was one night I was home, and at 4 a.m, the phone rang. And, you get this kind of premonition, when the phone rings at that hour. And it was my father. And his voice was breaking. And he said, Mom died about an hour ago. And what had happened was she had a massive coronary, and she just died very quickly. So, you can't even react to that. You're in shock. And I said, I'll be in the first plane out tomorrow. And he said, the funeral's in 2 days. No, he didn't say that then. That was in the middle of the night. So I get there the next morning, and he said, the funeral is in 2 days, which was very quick. So my very large family, they couldn't get down there that quickly. My brother managed to come, and I had one cousin. My cousin Kenny came. And we were in shock, and so now, right away, we're having the funeral. So the first part of the funeral was perfectly normal. We went to the temple, the local temple, and there was a rabbi had been found who had never met my mother, and so he gave a very odd eulogy, but still, he did. And the other thing I didn't say is that what had happened after my mother died was that a funeral company immediately called my father, and they offered him a package, and they said they would take care of everything, and they offered him a very, very good price, and he was, he couldn't hardly function, and he just took it. All right, so we finished the service, and now we had to go to the cemetery, and the hearse drove up, and the first thing I noticed was that it was kind of an old car, and it was like about a 1954 Cadillac, and it was rusty. And the guy got out of the hearse, and my father got in, and he said, "Get in." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I'm driving the hearse." So the funeral was me and my father in the hearse, and my brother and my cousin Kenny behind us. That was the whole procession. And my father pulls out these directions to the cemetery, and I said, "Let me take a look at that." We had a map of Florida, I said, Dad, this cemetery is 50 miles away. And not only that, it was 50 miles inland towards, you didn't go 50 miles inland if you lived in Florida. So I began to get upset, and I had this dilemma of, do I yell at my father at my mother's funeral? Do I start yelling at him now? What's going on here? And I'm sitting there and I'm getting this very dark look on my face, and we're driving, and all of a sudden the car starts to, the hearse starts to backfire and sputter, and it came to a stop. It had broken down. So, so it turns out, one thing about, that I should tell you about my parents, they were highly idiosyncratic people. They were, they made friends with everybody. If you happened to be in an elevator with them, you were their best friend right after that, and then they couldn't remember people's names. It was just a sort of chronic chaos, and I can't even describe it, but we'll just say, my mother was very flamboyant, my father was very quiet. They fought like cat and dogs, but when they were not fighting, they made a good pair. They were like, so that's what they were like. And so, but one thing about my father was he was one of these people, he could fix anything, and he'd always fixed the cars. We never took the car. So came the thing of we're in the middle of nowhere now, and my father, the only shot at getting to the cemetery was my father try to fix the car, the hearse. So he takes off his jacket and rolls up his sleeves. He's starting to get grease on himself and everything. He does it, and finally he actually gets it going. And then we have a long, long drive, and we're out in the middle of nowhere, and we're passing this unbelievable poverty, I'm shocked, these shacks and everything, which we have to stop and ask people if they, these sharecroppers, I don't even know what they were, but did they know where there might be a Jewish cemetery in the area? They didn't even answer us. And so finally, by some miracle, we find the cemetery, and it wasn't a cemetery at all. It was like a, what do you call it? One of those motorhomes or sitting there, and it was just like a big open space with a cardboard sign that said whatever name of the cemetery. And we pull in, and a man comes out, and it was at that point, I don't know, I kind of lost it, or maybe my mother's spirit came into me, and I said, Mom, I'm not going to let you be buried here. That's it. And I said, I'm going to throw myself into the grave and prevent my mother from being buried there. And it was just, so the way that went on, it was a standoff, and the guy came out, and it was a big thing, and I was crying hysterically. Nobody knew what to do, and I said, she's not going to be buried. This isn't even a cemetery. And in my memory of it, she was the first person to be buried there. There was nothing there. So the way it finally got resolved was that my cousin Kenny called the Stanetsky Funeral Home in Brookline and got somebody on the phone who assured me that if she was buried there, that I could move her to a cemetery in Brookline or wherever, close to where she would want to be, her family and everything. So I finally allowed it to happen. And here's the end of the story. So my father eventually remarried, and I made many trips down there to southern Florida. And one time I said, let's go visit Mom. We never found that cemetery, ever. And that's the story. So.
I have a younger brother, 3 years younger than I am, who is a very, very nice guy, and he is also very, very shy. Since he was a kid, he's always wanted to have a family of his own, but he had a really hard time getting out and meeting people. he didn't really date anybody until he was, 33 or so, because he had a really hard time with that. And he finally decided he was going to get serious about it. If he wanted to have a family, he had to do something about that. And he went on Match.com, went on a couple of dates, and pretty quickly met somebody also very nice, a young lady named Jillian. They dated for a few months, decided they were ready to get this show on the road, got engaged, and decided to get married in Hawaii. Her parents have spent a lot of time out there, and so they thought that it would be a very nice and romantic setting, and it had the added benefit that nobody would come to the wedding because it was so far away. But I come from a small family, a very tight-knit family. It's just me and my brother and our parents. Jillian has 3 siblings, but they all, by that time, were married and had kids of their own and weren't really keen on making that trip. So I flew to Hawaii. My parents had flown in just before me, and we all shared a motel room. And Jonathan and Jillian decided to get married not on the beach, which would seem to be the natural kind of thing to do in Hawaii, but inside a Catholic church, a very unair-conditioned Catholic church. And we went out there the night before. We checked out the church, figured out where everybody was going to stand, and everybody is a very small number of people. Me, my parents, Jillian's parents. There's also a priest and a photographer. That's everybody. And then the day of the wedding arrives, and we get to the church, and Jonathan says, "Oh, and by the way, also, our cousin Clay's 2 teenage children will be joining us." I think, oh, okay, that's really odd. He had been walking around with Jillian that morning, and they had run into, on the street, my cousin Clay's 2 teenage children with their mother and their stepfather, who happened to be in Maui at the same time for a visit. They said, "Oh my gosh, Jonathan, what are you doing here?" He's like, "Well, I'm getting married. Do you want to come to the wedding?" So they are lovely, lovely children, and he has known them very well their whole lives. And so it was not strange for them to be there, but it was in the wedding pictures now. Forever, when they look back, they're going to have their parents and me, and also our cousin's kids. And that's the entire population of the wedding. So that coincidental meeting I thought was pretty odd.
I went to a wedding, I don't know, more years than I care to tell you, in Hawaii. A friend of mine got married in Hawaii. We all flew out. We got there 3 days before the wedding. The day of the wedding was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We thought we had the whole day. We went across the island. We were going to go on a glider ride. On the way back, we got caught in a traffic jam. I didn't realize they had traffic jams in Hawaii, they're bad ones. And we missed the wedding. We got there as the bride and groom. We flew all the way to Hawaii, and we got there as the bride and groom walked out of the church. So that's my story.
The student had just been completing his term of study with a very distinguished rabbi. And he said, "Rabbi, we've been studying Torah, Talmud, Musar, Kabbalah, all of these Jewish texts. Would you please give me a really profound blessing? Next week is our last session. I will give you a blessing." Comes next week. Rabbi says, "I wish you a very peaceful death. And I wish your children a very peaceful death. And your grandchildren a very peaceful death." Rabbi, I'll be polite and I'll say that is really very odd. But realistically, is that a blessing that you give to someone about death? "Well, my student, are you going to die?" "Of course I'm going to die." "Are your children going to die?" "Yeah, I guess my children are going to die." "Are your grandchildren going to die?" I guess eventually my grandchildren will die. He says, so death is really not the blessing here, because that is just going to happen. And the blessing is not about longevity either. The blessing is about the order that these events will happen. May you die, and eventually may your children die, and eventually may your grandchildren die. That is the blessing. My brother and sister-in-law did not get that blessing. In June, we buried their son, my nephew. He was in his mid-50s. He had progressive supranuclear palsy. It's a Parkinson's-like disease that affects your motor skills first, that deteriorate, then your cognitive skills. It was not a peaceful death. Last month was the 10th anniversary of the death of their grandchild, 18 years old. Derek had borrowed his friend's motorcycle and lost control and went into a telephone pole. Not a peaceful death. Derek was a brilliant lad, 18. He had taken the Microsoft Certified Engineering exam and at the age of 12 passed it. He had mastered computers. On the day of his funeral, he was supposed to appear at Albert Einstein Medical School to start training in neurosurgery. That obviously never happened. So they were not given the blessing of order. Now this week is Thanksgiving. Everybody is going to be with their families. And may I say, have a very, very wonderful Thanksgiving. And let me be so bold as to say, I give you the blessing of death eventually, but most importantly, in the proper order.
It's August 13, 1968. I am 20 years old. I'm a Jewish girl growing up in Poland, post-war, post-Holocaust war Poland. Poland is my country. I haven't known any other country. This has been my home for 20 years. But today, I'm leaving Poland. I'm a refugee. I don't know where I'm going. I'm going on my own. I have very little with me. How did it happen? How did it happen? It happened so fast that we really didn't know what hit us. Somewhere earlier that spring, March, April, suddenly the official propaganda took on a more than odd turn. It was definitely weird. We were told that we are different. We are told that we are not loyal to the Polish nation. We are told that we are Zionists, that we are the fifth column, and we better go. What to do? My parents are in their 50s. It's only 25 years since they survived the Holocaust, and now what? Pick up the bags and go? I made the move. I said, I'll go. I'll go first, and then we will somehow meet up somewhere out there. The way to leave Poland in '68 was to sign the paper. First paper you sign is that you are a Zionist and that your loyalties are not with Poland but with Israel. The second paper you sign is that you relinquish voluntarily Polish citizenship. The third paper you sign is that you're going to Israel and you never come back. So I signed all these papers,
And within, this all happened so fast that before I noticed, it's time to go. I have a ticket. But my parents don't want to go to Israel. They say, child, go to America. Go to America. How do I go to America? You'll have to figure it out somehow along the way. You go to America. So the way from Warsaw to Israel was as follows in 1968. A night train from Warsaw to Vienna, and then you take a plane to Tel Aviv. What will happen to me when I get in Vienna? Well, somebody will probably waiting for you. We don't know, but it looks like maybe somebody was waiting for you. But remember, you're going to America. 7 o'clock, the train is leaving Warsaw. I have luggage. You wouldn't believe. I know there are no props, but I found this list that my father wrote by hand of everything that was inside my luggage. So I had hand-embroidered linen tablecloths with matching napkins, 12 for each. I had hand-cut crystal vases. I had big packets of sanitary napkins. This was before the Tampax was invented. I had a bed cover and a pillow filled with the best hand-picked goose down you could find in the villages, backward villages of Poland. I had organic chemistry textbook and physical chemistry textbook and inorganic chemistry textbook. And I had this little transistor radio, Soviet-made transistor radio about this size, where my father removed the battery, hollowed it out, and illegally put a $100 bill inside it, which he bought on the black market, highly illegal. So I get on the train, say goodbye to my brother, my parents. We are so choked up, we don't say anything. I get on this train. It's a very nice train, this old-fashioned train, compartments, 8 people in each compartment, velvet seats, pretty nice. And we're sitting there, 8 people in this compartment overnight. There is one family there that's also leaving Poland. The rest are just people. The Breitburg family. The Breitburg family is the mother and the father, the 9-year-old daughter, and a very, very, very old mother. She was in her mid-70s. I'm 20. But they have their everything figured out. They've been trying to emigrate from Poland for years to the United States, relatives in St. Louis. They finally got it. They have visas to United States. They are all set. I don't know where I am going. So first we cross the border, Poland, Czechoslovakia. They're searching everything. My luggage is all out there. They put me in a compartment, close the door, close the curtains, stripped naked. What the hell are they looking for? But it's part of the procedure. And the man looks at my luggage and takes out the tampons and the tablecloths and the organic chemistry, and then he takes out the transistor radio. And my knees are getting soft. He looks at it. Turns out he probably thought, why is she taking Soviet transistor radio to the West, right? But he turns it on, it doesn't work because the battery is messing. I say, if he gets me off this plane to do a deeper search, I'm in trouble. But I guess he was lazy that day. Close it, throw it in. We made it. Now, several hours later, we're crossing another border, Czechoslovakia to Austria. Now, these people are friendly. They are nice. They come and check our our documents. Now, the document I have is not a passport because I don't have a citizenship. I'm a refugee, stateless. It's some kind of a document that says it's a travel document, and in several languages it says in big letters, the owner of this document is not a Polish citizen, as though it required several languages to say it. So the Austrian patrol man looks at me and he takes this document and walks away. Now that's odd. Where is he going? This is my only identity card that I have. He doesn't even turn back. I call him, doesn't turn back, he leaves. A few hours later, I arrive in Vienna. Now they speaking German and I don't. Bustle and hustle as at the train station, as you always see, people getting off, people schlepping their luggage, people hugging each other, somebody's waiting for somebody. And I really don't even know what I'm thinking. I'm just standing there, and the Breitburg family, fortunately, they're standing next to me. And in all this chaos, suddenly somebody calls my name. I turn around and there is this young man with a big smile, friendly, and he speaks Polish. He says, he looks at his papers and he says, are you? Yes, I am. Don't worry, I'm a representative of the state of Israel. I'm going to take you with me now and everything will be fine. But I'm not going to Israel, I said. You're not going to Israel? No, I'm going to America. He's not smiling anymore. And I see he's holding my document. That's what they did. The Austrian government had a deal with Israel. They gave them my document to take me. Can I have my document? He turns around and walks away. He just walks away. And I'm standing here on a platform in Vienna with my luggage and my textbooks and my tablecloths. I mean, the Breitburg said, the family, come with us. We have a place to stay tonight. But there was one thing I brought with me besides this ridiculous luggage. My mother said before I left Poland, she said, there are some people out there in Vienna. There are some organizations, they will help you. Don't write it down. Don't write it down, it's too dangerous. Everything was dangerous at that time. We were afraid to talk. But remember, Brahmsplatz number 2. That's where you go. When everything else falls apart, go to Brahmsplatz number 2. So I went with the Breitburgs, and we stayed in some little motel somewhere one night. And the next morning, I bought a map of Vienna and I located Brahmsplatz on this map of Vienna. And that's the beginning of my American Odyssey. There is more to say, but that will have to go some other time.
So last year, the past 2 years, I've been doing my master's degree at the museum school. And time came for the thesis. And all these kids are running around like crazy. They're so nervous. And I got my bachelor's degree in 1974. So my brother, who doesn't tell a lot of stories, he told me this story. So there's this rabbit sitting on the side of the road. And he's got a piece of paper, and he's writing on the piece of paper. And a lion comes along, and he says, "What are you doing?" And the rabbit says, "I'm writing my thesis." And the lion says, "Well, put that away, because I'm going to eat you." And he said, No. Before you get too hungry, let me take you over here. There's a cave back here. I want to take you over and let you see what's going on in the cave back here. So he takes him over to the cave, and you hear this noise. Rah, 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 rah. The rabbit goes back, sits on the curb, and he starts writing again. And a hyena comes along, and the hyena says, "What are you doing?" The rabbit says, "I'm writing my thesis." And the hyena says, "Oh, put that away. I want to eat you." He says, No, don't eat me yet. Let's go back over to the cave. I want you to go see what's in the cave. So they go over to the cave, and hyena goes in, and you hear, "Ah!" and there's all this noise and banging and everything else. So the rabbit goes back over to the curb, and he starts writing again. And a wolf comes along. And the wolf says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm writing my thesis, and I'm almost done." He says, "Well, I want to eat you." He says, "Well, don't eat me yet. Let me go take you over to this cave back here." So they walk over to the cave, and they look in, and the wolf says, "Oh, all this blood and guts and bones all over the place. But what's that back there? What's that back there, that bear? What's he doing?" "Oh, that's my advisor." Thank you.
So, David and I were sitting at Felipe's restaurant in Harvard Square. We were having a light dinner, and it was a late dinner as well. Felipe's is really popular with Harvard students, and it's very crowded and very loud. And this was the day before David was due to fly to Germany to be with his girlfriend, Laura. And he was really struggling if whether or not this was the right thing to do, because David was originally from Colombia, and he has dark brown hair and dark brown eyes and light brown skin. And he had visited Laura a year earlier in Germany. She's blonde with a German family, and they were all very supportive of their relationship. But to be out in public, people would mistake David for a Syrian refugee. And so he just wasn't always comfortable. And he was debating as to whether or not he should go back to Colombia rather than go to Germany and be with Laura and be with her family and learn German and all of these things he had kind of set himself out to do. And it was clear to me what the right thing to do was, but it wasn't my choice to make. And I wanted to persuade him to go to Germany because that seems like change. And even if his relationship with Laura didn't work out, at least it would be a step forward, whereas returning back to Colombia and just resuming the life he'd had before didn't seem like a step forward. If nothing else, it was just staying put. And part of the problem was that he didn't feel like Laura had been listening to him and listening to his concerns, and his concerns were real, and he just didn't know what would become of him if he went to Germany. And they had been fighting every day. Like, they'd had a relationship for a couple of years, and it was a long-distance relationship where she went to visit him in Colombia, he went to visit her in Germany. They both came to visit both of us in Cambridge. And in between were essentially daily Skype calls. It was a technology that kept their relationship going. And lately, the daily Skype calls were daily arguments, daily fights. And he's telling me all of this, and he's not sure if he's going to be able to get on the plane. And I told him that it is amazing to me that he and Laura are able to communicate in English, because that was neither of their first languages. Like, David grew up speaking Spanish, she grew up speaking German, and English was their common tongue. And I was like, my husband and I, we grew up in New England, and we miscommunicate in English all the time, and I can't imagine what it's like to try to deal with any sort of nuance when it's not your native language. And so I had been through a lot of therapy, and that's a different story. So one of the things that I wanted to help David with was this technique called active listening, where you literally have to repeat back to someone what they just said to you. And part of it is so that you can be sure that you actually heard them. And part of it is to pause, is to give you time to stop, because most people actually form a response while they're supposedly listening to what someone is saying, because they have to be out there and say that thing that's coming up in their mind because it's so important. And so active listening is since you have to say back to someone what they just said to you, you're taking a break. and then you get to respond. And so I'm like, well, maybe you could use this technique with Laura. Maybe you can communicate better, more effectively with Laura if you were to do this. And he was like, okay. And I said, well, you can't just, it's not an intellectual thing. You have to practice it. Why don't we practice it now, here at Felipe's? Like, I'll be Laura, you be David, and let's just do this. And it'll, that way you'll be more prepared. And he was like, okay. And so he began. And he said, honey, it bothers me when you're with your friends and you sit with your legs spread open. And I said, okay, I heard you say that it bothers you when I'm with my friends and I sit with my legs open. Is that right? And he said, yes. And I said, well, when I'm with my friends, I am comfortable. And this is how I like to sit. And when I am in a different setting, like maybe with my grandmother, I will sit in a more formal way. But that's not who I am. That's not me being relaxed and comfortable. Wouldn't you like me to be relaxed and comfortable? And he said, yes. I said, okay. And he said, well, it bothers me that you still have photographs of your German boyfriend on your computer, even when you knew it bothered me and I asked you to delete them and you said you would and you didn't. And I said, okay, I heard you say that it bothered you that I still had the pictures of my German boyfriend on my computer, even though I knew it bothered you and you asked me to delete them and I said I would, but I didn't. And he said, yes. And I said, well, I shouldn't have lied to you because I knew I wouldn't delete them because they're part of my history and it is important to me and I never should have made a promise that I knew I couldn't keep. But it is part of my history because you are my boyfriend. He's not. And so you should be secure in that. I've chosen you over him. And he said, okay. And then he said that it bothers him that he was uncomfortable with how much I've been drinking when we're out in public. And he didn't want his woman to act like that. And I said, let's get one thing clear. First of all, I am not your woman. I am an adult. I am able to make my own choices, and I choose to be with you. And if I don't choose to be with you, that is also my choice. And he said, uh-huh. And I said, secondly, you're going to have to drop this Latin macho bullshit, because I'm not going to put up with it. And he had a tear in his eye, and he said, you sound just like Laura. And what I wanted out of that moment, most of all, was to be with the couple sitting next to us who were trying to figure this out, because they couldn't hear all of it, but they heard enough. And David did get on the plane, and he's with Laura still. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming.